wèmi awèn, kulamalsihemo hech. This is the LangShack again. Today, we're going to be talking about the Lenni Lenape language. This language is indigenous to many of the United States' northeast areas, such as the entirety of the state of New Jersey, pretty much all of New York City and its surroundings, as well as the city of Philadelphia and most of the state of Delaware. Today, we're going to be discussing the following topics today. We'll be going over the dialect, syntax of the language, sounds it has, verbs and nouns, which oftentimes serve the same purpose, some of the moods and tenses specific to verbs, a little bit on adjectives, and we'll also talk about stringing verbs at the end. Various Lenape dialects. So in Lenapehoking, which was the name of the Lenape sovereign nation, there were generally 3 or 4 main dialects. Moonsea in the north, Northern Unami, another, not sure if they're the same or not, I couldn't quite make out the name in the image, which are spoken in the central regions. There was also a southern Unami dialect, which, as far as I understand, is the best attested and the main one used in the Lenape tribe's official dictionary, the Talking Lenape Dictionary. Interestingly enough, the Connecticut border, according to this map, appears to be the unofficial borderlands region of the Metabesic and the Lenape nations. So the sound system. These are the consonants of Lenape. As you can see, pretty much all of their consonant inventory exists in the English language. However, one thing to note is that there are many sounds that to us would be different sounds, but they work a little differently in Lenape. This, I believe, is called consonant voicing or consonant devoicing. These sounds can vary between the other. They're interchangeable in Lenape though, where saying nta, which means I go, would mean the same thing as saying nda. So the vowels, most of the vowels, again, much like the consonants, are sounds that are present in English as well. But the vowels are precise in their official spelling. So many types of uhs, like the well-known schwa, long and short vowels, and even a curveball, like the slightly open aw, are all in Lenape. Thankfully, the tribe has an official talking dictionary, so no one has to go without proper Lenape pronunciation. And there are also 2 diphthongs, ow and a. Now on to the syntax of Lenape. There isn't too much to say here, given the syntax appears to be fairly free in Lenape, with no apparent pattern for the verb. It seems that it most commonly goes at the end, but this is not always the case, as it shows frequently at the start of a clause too. For example, sapan namanitu sotpuk, where sapan means sapan, which is a Lenape dish, namanitu I make, and then sotpuk tomorrow morning. And then the second example, utanink num. Utanink is the word for town, which is utane in the nominative form, and utanink in the ablative case, meaning that you're coming from the town. The verb which means to come or to leave from a place. So with that conjugation. So I wanted to cover the interrogative marker because not only does it have a very particular marked place in the Lenape sentence, but it's also extremely common for practically every question. And every question with an interrogative, WH style word, or where you expect a yes or no answer. So for example, keha hech kelak, what time is it? Where hech comes after keha. Keha means how much or how many. In the second example, it's a little bit different because there is no interrogative before the hech, but in this case, it's the kuski, meaning can or to be able to, will still replace that word, interrogative word in this case. This section, the introduction to Lenape noun, I call it Lenape noun verb duality. So it's a little bit more difficult to introduce these since they're often one of the same, but we'll try to pick out where it acts like a verb and acts simply as a noun in both of those use cases. One thing to note here is that nouns and verbs can both be attached to mean the other. Although there are explicit suffixes that can be attached to an affix to make it act as an abstract sort of noun, such as the ending wakàn, as you can see in the example here. This wakàn, I believe, is called a nominalizer, and this turns the verb into a noun explicitly. Or mikemo says the verb for working, and then wakàn makes it a noun specifically, makes that clear. When conjugating a verb, one single paradigm can fill an entire volume. For example, nemitsi means that you eat something in general, or that I eat something. But if you put this affix ma, which means something that is taking place at this very moment, nemamitsi, then that means I am eating at this very moment. Each of these, whether you're saying nemamitsi or nemitsi, they're separately conjugated in all of the same forms. There is an exception to this rule, which we'll share later in the presentation. Noun to verb transformation. So verbs can be mysterious and sometimes downright confusing. So let's take a look. In this form where the noun whose action is hard to ascertain can be repurposed into a verb, it takes its own conjugations, which are atypical of many European languages. I say that because this language is intriguing in this aspect. As this pattern, it kind of reminds me of in German, I believe there's this construction where you could say like, kannst du Deutsch or something like that, where it's can you German. It essentially is like, can you speak German? And this is how Lenape would ask if you can make a certain kind of food. Like if you could or are able to make that food, since the noun salaponha, meaning fry bread, can also act as a verb according to Lenape structure, even though it appears as a noun to us. The logical thing, since it's combining with kuski, is that someone could fry bread, right? Only thing that you could that would make sense from that is making fry bread, if you get my drift. So going back to affixes and the paradigms that the verb could fill, you've also got cases where an affix requires its own set of conjugation, which at first glance may not seem intuitive whatsoever, such as the causative suffix that you can see. In this case, this goes after the verb stem, which is unlike the suffix ma or even the suffix wa, which is a frequency affix, which means that you're doing something on a regular basis. And then it conjugates this into its own meaning. So you see the ed and the quan, they're very different from the general first and second person singular conjugations, and there seems to be no relevance between them. Whereas with quenk and ot and quek and quichtit, at least those are kind of sort of relevant to the third person singular and all the plural forms. Sometimes we can chain verbs. So we have a more extensive slide at the end of this presentation. However, sometimes they can take multiple affixes to express a sentence. So in this example, nashinki wipoma, I dislike eating with him. You can see how two verbs can combine in this sentence. And weepom is a rare form of the verb to eat. There's another verb that's much more common, meets eat. Various affixes are frequently chained onto one another to express meaning, which theoretically can get as complex as any polysynthetic language, which means that they just chain on different affixes to express their verbs. So in this example, we have the verb to meet. Sometimes verbs can conjugate to one of two different ways, where in the intuitive way you would put the first person singular conjugation at the front of the verb, like nakiskaku, he meets me, and where this looks like I meet him. And you can also say kiskao, I meet him. And then you also have sometimes where you have this where kiska means to meet. And sometimes with verbs that start in a k, whenever it's the second person singular, which starts in a k generally, it just combines with a k. And then you would use this at the end. So kisku, I meet you. But the indication that you are the one who met him is put at the end of that. So there are other affixes that can go before the verb to extend the aspect, such as wa, which is the general continuous mood, as I mentioned earlier, and ma, which is the present progressive mood, as we saw earlier. Although the majority of them appear after, they use the general conjugations. They don't change anything, like the causative marker requires a whole different set of conjugation. And wa is in the wawulamalsi. That's another example of this. So the reflexive form. This form is used to express something that is happening to yourself. So this is generally done with the affix hokaya. You can say this for many different reflexive verbs. There's many different verbs that are given in the 1828 grammar that I've been using to learn this language. And there's many kinds, like loving yourself, taking care of yourself is penawelem. So penawelem hokaya, take care of myself. Penawelem kehokaya, take care of yourself. The subjunctive mood is used to express possibilities and things that could happen, desires, and in this language is mostly used for like when, if, as, and there's a whole lot of other meanings that this can extend to, much like Spanish subjunctive. And we're just going to go over this very quickly. You may see this being attached to long nouns, this passive suffix, which generally it just is like a to be something, like to be eaten, to be done, to be seen, that kind of thing. You may see this being attached to long nouns where this is used to turn it into an ed type of verbal noun, like the beloved or the eaten, something like that. So this is an example of a suffix that goes after the verb or the noun stem. and then whatever tense conjugations are added on to the end. Kunhasik. So in this example, kunhasik iced te ti wiumka, which means to stir or to mix, and ukusi, which turns this into is being stirred. So now on to identifying variants in STEM. The reason I bring up this particular topic is because if you're learning the Lenape language, you're going to notice that there's a lot of different variations that are possible in a noun or a verb. And that's because the language is not standardized, so there's not one form to say something. The tribe has put probably the most common form of verbs in their dictionary to show that it's the most common, but if you look at other examples, oftentimes there will be many variations. These can be used by the same speaker as well. So that complicates the matter because we don't know why these exist. We don't know if these don't appear to be regional, but I'm sure that there were regional variances. But what it appears is that one verb could have many different variants. And I will show you how you can figure this out. But it's important to know if you're studying a language like this or any other indigenous language that has no standardized form, because these are possible. So kelesta is the verb to listen, and there's many different variants like quelista, calceta, colota, oholista. And then I've shared another verb here, which it will show a little bit better how you can go and pick these out. This more complicated example, it was much harder to deduce, but it had some patterns actually adjusted that these were simply variants. Even in the question particle, hech or hech, there's also variation. Just I wanted to make that note. In this example, I was able to see that there was this neem and this nutam. There was a num and a num at the end. And I could also see that despite it being akka, which has no T in it, and take, which has no H in it, that these two things were similar because they look like they could be related and they were being used in the same contexts. So for example, ntakanimwok, I discussed them. You could easily say nakanutamwok, and that would mean the exact same thing. So you could interchange any of these. But just as in the second example where you see akanutamanen mikamosewak, we talked about work. You could easily take the same thing and say takanim manen mikamosewakan. You could easily replace this akanutam and replace it with takani. And to confirm this, I found a related root which I happened to just come across. I didn't even look for this, which showed me that it's the same. So when you take this unta and you add it on to take or ake, they mean the exact same thing. So they mean to read, they mean to count, just like takanim or akanutam means to talk about something or to discuss something. The contexts are similar, they match up, and they also have another variant which shows that this is simply the same verb with different phonetic variances. That's it. So on to adjectives. Lenape adjectives, like normal verbs, are exactly the same. Where we might say something like it's hot outside or I'm feeling cold, in Lenape this would be something like it hots outside or I am colding. In the Lenape language there is no difference between them. So in the following examples, tuhele, it is cold. It is cool, meaning like meat. Tuhele or tuhele, I am feeling cool. Say you were in the heat for a long time or outside the summer. Or tuhele, he is feeling cool or feeling cooled down in the same way. There are sometimes cases with these where the distinction between things or people in declining an adjective are marked, such as in this example, if it's wet. So scape, it is wet. Or scape u in this 1828 grammar. And then if you're speaking of things, then you could say scapewa, wa being a suffix for marking things in this context, and then scapewak. And because it's walk, you know it's talking about people, so they are wet. So depending on the ending that is being used after scape, which means wet, you can tell whether it's being used for a general object, multiple different items, or various people. The same concept is also applied to instances where we would only use or associate a phrase with a thing, but it's used for humans as well. The only difference in these examples is that for an object not referring to a person, this wulamo or wulama takes you. You simply means this, but in this context, it can mean it. And the others are actually referring to people. So these are going to take typical verb conjugation endings. And then I also want to show you that you can take the same general affixes for the past as parts of these adjective verbs too. So in this word piske, which means dark, you simply add the p from the past tense, and this turns it into it was dark. Piske, it was dark. Piscape, it was dark. In these examples, you can attach affixes that are what we call intensifiers, or they demonstrate how adjective something was, how hot it was, how cold it was, blah blah. And in this example, achwi, or I should say achwi, so I forgot to update the spelling here. So achwi piske, quite dark. You can put this right in front of the same adjective or verb. And this construction would also work for general verbs as well, as adjectives and verbs are one and the same in this language. And last but not least, I wanted to show this last section on stringing verbs together. Sometimes this is done in the context of using multiple verbs in a sentence, but sometimes there are verbs that are combinations of two and mean something else, but whose stems could be picked out and defined separately. But we're only going to demonstrate the practical use case, as this is what people are likely to actually use. For example, I started eating, I loved drinking, I jumped to eating, etc. Lenape tends to take off some portion of the next stem. Generally, the first verb will harmonize its final vowel depending on the consonant or vowel that comes after it. And that second or third verb will typically have its first part cut off, or some part of its ending part, usually just the initial or the final syllable. Anyway, kahela wanishi, thank you very much. Thank you all for watching. If you've reached this part of the video, why not consider subscribing, liking this video, or sharing it with anyone you think would benefit from this. And also, if you're interested in learning languages by consuming your own content, or content that you want to learn from, and any interest that you may possibly have, I have a website called LangShack.club that offers you an easy way to learn languages with all kinds of tools that are in articles and dialogues that you generate based on whatever topics, and you can keep track of your words, and you can also practice dialogues with AI. So if this is something that interests you, then head over to LangShack.club and pick up one of the many languages we have. We even have rare languages like Lenape and Ali, or many common world languages. So if you're interested in that, head over to LangShack.club. We also have many free resources such as dictionaries, word books, as well as a blog. So I look forward to seeing you all in the next video. Thank you for watching.